What does it mean to be a human being, and what does it mean to live like a legitimate, genuine human being rather than someone who is blighted by ultra convenience on one hand but ultra overstimulation on the other hand, and those two combined create this pretty, nasty mix and mixture of challenges.
Can you draw it out for me? Like, what does your world look like where people are flourishing?
Christ.
Jamie Clements is on a mission to help us regulate our nervous system and reconnect with our breath. From the rugby pitch to the inner world, his journey is about transformation, healing, and finding balance in a restless age. Is there a breathwork exercise you can do for us now?
So what we'll do, given where we are in the day, for anybody listening, we're 4 p.m. So I'm starting to think about, I don't want to send myself to sleep. I also don't want to stimulate myself necessarily. I just want a nice kind of balanced, calm focus. So we're going to lean into some, it is hard to stay regulated in ultimately what is quite a dysregulating environment. You hear these big transformations of people completely, pulling a U-turn on their life.
What does 2030 look like for you from a nervous system regulation standpoint?
It's a really good question because if I'm really honest,
the future looks amazing, but also a little scary. If you, just like me, want to have an honest outlook of what the next chapter could look like and how best to prepare for that, I ask for one simple favour: subscribe, so I can invite the brightest minds on this podcast and get those answers for both you and I. Enjoy the episode. Why do you think someone should tune in and listen to this episode?
At the very simplest level, because there might be something that lands. I don't believe I have anything necessarily unique to share, but what I do feel that I have is an ability to articulate ideas and articulate wisdom, and the wisdom of the work that I do and the work that is done through me in a way that seems to resonate with people and be accessible. And I've lived what I teach, and I think that's really important for me, that I embody everything that I share. And so at the core of the work that I do, I view my role very much being a guide and a facilitator of bringing people back to themselves and back to agency and an acknowledgement of their wholeness as a human being. And so if that resonates, then hopefully people will stick around.
Love that. You're somewhat young to be at this point in your journey. I know that you were at Durham. You're for our American listeners, a collegiate champion rugby player, and then went on and worked in quite a normal job, right? Was there a rock bottom moment, a moment in your 20s where you were like, I need to change career, life, I need to go into something more meaningful?
Yes. I would say there was a series of rock bottoms, probably a rock bottom period that started around the age of 15 and deepened for the next 8-9 years into my early 20s.
What happened when you were 15?
My parents separated. I have done enough therapy to know that not every issue I've faced hangs on that singular event, but as far as significant trauma in my life and significant challenges in my life, that's up there. It's near the top. I have a wonderful relationship with both my parents that I'm very, very grateful for, and I'm, without wanting to bypass in any way, shape or form, incredibly grateful for everything that's happened to me in my life, because I wouldn't be in this position without it. And I enjoy my life. I appreciate my life as it is right now. So I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. But the real rock bottom moment came at around 23, 24. I was running a UK sales team in a tech startup. I was in a happy enough relationship, but was facing a lot of challenges with anxiety within the relationship. I had been struggling with severe anxiety and depression on and off for the best part of 7-8 years. And I started having panic attacks around the age of 21. At the age of 23, in the space of, I want to say 3 months, that relationship came to an end. I was let go somewhat unceremoniously from that job for some stuff relating to mental health. And I lost a friend from school to suicide. And it was simultaneously a slap in the face, but also a deepening of the challenges that I was facing. And I wasn't in a position at that point in time to help myself completely on my own. And I was really reaching this point of deep struggle with particularly the anxiety. I remember one moment being stood outside Liverpool Street Station, having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, and tunnel vision, in tears, the walls closing in. And it was that period that then unfolded after that in one way or another set me off on a different trajectory. I always view our suffering, our pain as almost a bit of there's an elasticity to it. We're being pulled, or we've pulled ourselves so far away from our path and who we are, that tension within us is enhanced and enhanced and enhanced until there's no choice but for it to snap back into place. And I think that for me was the end of the tension in the bow that then slammed me back towards initially a whole lot of pain, but that pain then leading to something more meaningful and some change in my life that needed to happen.
Yeah, it's crazy, but your story is so similar to mine. At 21, I had that rock bottom moment, and then the amount of anxiety, the panic attacks and all that stuff, it's like there's only one way. And it feels almost, it's crazy. I hear this time and time again about this rock bottom moment. You almost need to get there to start asserting yourself and making those changes that really lead to finding your own path and your purpose.
Absolutely. I'm curious, I guess, from your side, because I often reflect on my own journey and think, could I have got there sooner? Could I have learned the lesson that I ended up learning at 23, 24, at 21, at 18? Could I have listened to the signs or the symptoms or tuned in a bit quicker and made different decisions? And I think for me, the answer I often come to is with these things is no, it happened how it was supposed to happen and when it happened. But were for you, obviously with that rock bottom moment that you mentioned at 21, were there moments in the lead up to that over the years where you go, that was also pretty bad, and the almost awakening, like the almost rock bottom moment?
I would be asking you the question.
Yeah,
I'll rephrase it very quickly.
Yeah.
And then, because I think actually at the root of it is conditioning, like
Mm-hmm.
the amount of conditioning you have in the UK when it comes to drinking, boozing, partying, stuff that like in moderation is great, but I was hitting it so hard. There was no way that I was, it was the awareness piece. It was the fact that I was so distracted by what was around me, trying to be that person, that fun person, that person that was the life and the center of attention. It wasn't until everything slammed on me and I was forced with a really bad injury to sit and allow everything to come in and to deal with all this stuff. So yeah, I think the conditioning piece, that's really important. How about yourself? Like, given that you were at a university in a sport that has aspects to it that is, related to binge drinking and all that.
Absolutely. I often speak to, there's a good friend of mine who's a very successful kind of personal trainer and content creator. And we played rugby together at university, and we go, how did we train 6 times a week, play on a Wednesday, and hit it as hard as we did with drink and going out, and the amount of sleep we were getting, the diet that I had, the alcohol? My mum often likes to make the point of, are you really, like, knowing yourself now, are you really that surprised that you were struggling so much? I go, I have, a poor night's sleep and a couple of glasses of wine now, and I wake up in the morning going, it's existential dread. And so is it any surprise that the binge drinking and the excess and that side of things was impacting me in the way that it was? And for me, again, I think it does tie to conditioning. For me, I put a lot of my challenges that I faced down to living a life that simply wasn't for me. Yeah. I was doing the shoulds. I was, doing the course I thought I should be doing. I was pursuing the job that I thought I should have. I was doing all of the things I thought I should be doing. I was really deeply disconnected from myself and trying so desperately to force myself into it. And particularly around rugby, I think this is a really interesting one for me that I don't often get a chance to speak about that often, because it's, it's in my past now, but it's very much a part of the journey that's led me here, which is that there's a lot of good that I've taken from sport, and particularly from rugby. I think there's aspects of physicality, of masculinity, of teamwork, of resilience, of throwing yourself into something fully that I've carried through my entire life and still serve me to this day and will continue to serve me. I also think because I was naturally quite talented, I wasn't really the gritty grafter who trained hard. I was pretty quick, I was pretty big, I was pretty handy with the ball in my hands. And so I found myself there more by virtue of that than absolutely loving the sport or really, really wanting it. And because of that, all of a sudden I was in that world and I was going, oh, what does everyone in this world look like, speak like, act like? And I started doing that because we're wired ultimately in a big way for acceptance, for being part of the tribe. And as part of my teens and early 20s, I was a real sucker for the challenge that a lot of us face, which is just desperately wanting to fit in. And so that molding of myself into the rugby guy or the fintech guy or the whatever guy just took me further away from myself. And you know, the path that I've been on the last 8 years of really getting into the world that I do now and the life that I have now has been one of reconnecting back to myself and reclaiming what it means to be me. And I always used to think that that was becoming something new and someone new. And the more I've sat with it, I go, I used to have a little book of philosophical quotes when I was 14, and I still have that now. And it's actually just come full circle, which I think is not a novel concept, but it's definitely been something that I've realized the deeper that I've gone into this new path is that ultimately it's just a revealing or an unveiling of what was there before.
It feels that first step is always the hardest, that fear of judgment. What are they going to say? Well, especially the people nearest to you. Sapien Labs, they had a mental state of the world report that came out recently, I think it was today, that said the UK is the most stressed country in the world and the second most miserable. Why do you think that's the case?
Weather, lack of vitamin D. But I think a big part of it is our badge of honor that we wear of cynicism. This, stiff upper lip repression combined with self-deprecation to a fault. It's humility, but it's not humility. It's gone way beyond that into now just, I can't say anything good about myself because someone might be like, oh, why are you being a prick? Why are you being so arrogant? And I've held a fear of being seen as arrogant for as long as I can remember, to such a point that I fear being confident. And I've held myself back in lots of ways because of that. And I think that is institutionalized into the UK, which is this, whether you want to call it in certain forms like tall poppy syndrome, which is if you grow too high, we'll chop you down to keep everyone on the same height instead of growing and lifting people up with you. That's something I used to really be quite scathing about American culture. I was like, oh, they're so positive all the time. They're so bloody positive. Good. Like you want to be surrounded by positive people because it creates this energetic imprint on people around you. Whereas we're all just a bit miserable and keeping each other in check and making sure nobody gets too big and nobody grows too fast. And that's, there's a lot of chat at the moment about entrepreneurs leaving the UK, and it doesn't surprise me. So you can say on the surface of it, oh, it's the weather, but I think it runs a little deeper than that into just, we really struggle to celebrate ourselves and we really struggle to celebrate each other as a result.
How have you seen that changing as a breathwork practitioner with breath space? And then you're talking a lot and even more so now about nervous system regulation. Are you seeing more people in the UK looking up and saying, this is an area that I want to look into?
I think we're still early. I think we're still sort of missing the mark slightly. I think what we are seeing is a large majority of people looking up and going, this doesn't feel good. I'm not quite sure what this is, but this just doesn't feel good. I think stress, anxiety, all of these frontline symptoms of nervous system dysregulation, poor sleep, gut issues. We can list the symptoms and put plasters over them by changing our diet and changing, these small changes that can add up to something meaningful. But if we don't look at how we're living our lives, the environment that we're living within, and taking a level of ownership and responsibility for our internal state, we're always going to be up against it. We're going to be fighting fires. It becomes a bit like whack-a-mole. It's like the stress pops up somewhere if the stress is still there. And so, yes, I do think we are seeing, longer term, it's been with the mental health conversation. Now it's the holistic health conversation. It's the wellness conversation. Really, really important stuff and certainly making an impact, and people are taking notice. I still think we're very good at missing the mark. I still think we avoid actually going, what is it about the fabric of how we're living that is creating these challenges, rather than, just putting another band-aid, another plaster over the symptom that's presenting short term.
Super interesting, because our lived environment is changing so much. If you look at the conversation around microplastics or social media addiction and vaping and everything, like, it is much harder to exist today than it was like 30, 40 years ago. So I expect at some point people to start looking and saying, I need to sort out my nervous system.
It's also much easier in so many ways living today. I think we have the light and the dark, and I imagine that every generation, for as long as there's been generations, has said, "God, we've got it so much harder than the last lot." And then the parents are looking down, going, "You've got it so much easier than we had it." Which is it? It goes, does it matter? Being a human being comes with challenges. Suffering is built into the fabric of how we exist. We born on the backs of years and years of human struggle, and it's kind of at the core of who we are and what we are. And the ease is also creating, in a way, the dis-ease, which is the convenience of everything. The microplastic problem is a convenience problem. The stress problem, the overstimulation problem is a convenience problem. The junk food thing is a convenience problem. We've got empty versions of things that used to sustain us, just without the substance. And I think that, for me, is actually really at the core of a lot of the stresses and strains that we're facing. Is we have things that seem to scratch an itch. The comparison that people make between porn versus real sex. We've got junk food versus whole foods. We've got biohacking versus community-led well-being that's actually ingrained and inbuilt into society. We've got all of these things that human adjacent, but not quite actually hitting the mark. And so I think that's where what we're going to see come next, in my opinion, is this waking up to, how do we actually want to live? What does it mean to be a human being? And what does it mean to live like a legitimate, genuine human being, rather than someone who is blighted by ultra convenience on one hand, but ultra overstimulation on the other hand? And those two combined create this nasty mix and mixture of challenges. I always sort of cite the three core challenges as disconnection from self, dysregulation of the nervous system, and disconnection from meaning. And I think those three, for me, are almost the three horsemen of everyone's challenges at this point. And how do we start to work with that? For me, working with the nervous system is just to get a handle on, can you handle your life as it is right now, so that you can make a better decision for yourself about how you want to live. So it's not the be all and end all, but it's certainly the starting point. Is actually, okay, if I can get my sleep in check, if I can get my stress in check, if I can, actually think straight, then I can start going, what am I doing? What am I actually, what do I want to do with my life? We come off of autopilot and back into agency.
Can you draw it out for me? Like, what does your world look like where people are flourishing?
Christ. The utopia for realists is, Rutger Bregman likes to call it. Technology isn't going anywhere. I think that's the bit, there's the idealist version of my answer, which goes, let's just bin off all the tech and get back to good old fashioned indigenous communities. Everyone knows their neighbors and everyone's eating whole foods that we're growing ourselves. All of these things that I think inform the version that I have in my mind. But I think what we're looking at now is real human existence and connection facilitated and supported by technology. It's AI that does the shit that you don't want to do, so that you can live a really lovely, healthy, community-led experience. And so I think that, in the first instance, for me, addresses the sort of elephant in the room of tech, which it certainly isn't going anywhere, is only getting faster and faster. The basics and the fundamentals are around environment design. I think that, for me, is about where we live. So reducing stimulation in the environment, it's air quality, it's noise pollution, it's all of these things that, as a Londoner and someone who lives here, I laugh at, because we've kind of got the exact opposite. It's whole foods, it's community, but genuine community, not community for the sake of it, and certainly not giant communities. It's much smaller, kind of immersed communities where you genuinely do care for each other and depend on each other. We're a very hyper independent society nowadays, and any kind of dependence, whether it's romantic relationships or platonic, seems to be frowned upon. It's like, you should be able to do this on your own. You should be able to push through and do this on your own. Whereas actually it's okay. You know, we're relational beings. It's okay to depend on each other and rely on each other. And I think we're really lacking that. Smartphones are beating us into submission. I think, you know, I was talking to my partner this morning about screen time and screen time for children and all of these things that we start thinking about. And I don't know what we do about that. But for me, it's just boundaries around that. It's the meme that does the rounds on Instagram of what would happen if we, you know, turned off all social media at 6 p.m. and we just had the evenings. It's like, it'd be lovely. Probably never going to happen, but it'd be lovely. But can you put that into your own life, perhaps? So yeah, I think there's probably nothing surprising about, or nothing novel about any of the ideas that I have. And for me, that the version of my life where we start taking steps towards that is individual accountability for how you live your life. It's like you can create, and obviously circumstances different for all of us, but you can create a way of living that works for you within the context of the modern world. So your own boundaries with tech, your own, maybe it is growing your own food, maybe it is moving out to the countryside, maybe it is slowing things down. But I do think that slow paced living is really at the core of it, so that you can have more intentionality around it as well.
I've been thinking about the algorithm, the Instagram algorithm, all these social media platforms. It doesn't matter how strong, grounded you are. It is so utterly addictive. And I know very few people that have been able to get away from the level of addiction, more so than sugar or drugs or whatever. It's just crazy. So implementing something like setting boundaries, it's incredibly hard. I seem to delete my social media accounts, not the accounts, but the app off the phone, like once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, and it still just comes back. But there are 3 things you could suggest for our listeners to calm down their nervous system today. What would they be?
Breath is first and foremost. The reason for that being is that it is our most simple and accessible and one of the most powerful direct routes into shifting the state of the nervous system. So that is really at the core of all of the work that I do, is, you know, granting agency to the individual to shift and change the state of their nervous system. A very, very simple level is the slower you breathe, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, the more your nervous system will start to settle and calm down. So very simple, something like an extended exhale breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. Just making your exhale longer than your inhale will start to slow your heart rate and shift you into that more parasympathetic rest and digest response within the nervous system. So that is really just that's universal, and we know that works. We don't have to debate that anymore. The second is micro pauses. I think this is, more of a lifestyle strategy and lifestyle design piece, which is one of the biggest challenges with stress is our current way of doing things, which is wake up, have a coffee, start your day, 8 hours goes by, try and finish the day. And at no point have you taken a pause, a breath, a beat, from tech or from just work or whatever it might be, just to actually stop. Like, I do it to myself sometimes. I'm like, oh, when was the last time I stopped and didn't do anything? When was the last time I was bored? When was the last time I just sat still and closed my eyes for a minute during the last 3-4 hours of working? And often, not often as it used to be, but enough times I go, yeah, I haven't done that this morning. Okay, so this afternoon I'll do things differently, and trying not to beat ourselves up too much about it when we haven't done it. But those pauses to break up the day, maybe you combine that with some slow breathing. All of a sudden, I'd say one of the lesser known symptoms, if we want to call it that, of a dysregulated nervous system from a place of overstimulation is time speeding up, or our perception of time speeding up, which is, when you're most stressed, the day disappears. Where on earth did the day go? I know for a fact that when I am in a much more regulated state, I've got so much time on my hands. I can do this, and then I can do this, and then I can do that, and then I can take a break for 15 minutes, and then I can go and work out. And everything feels more spacious. And so I think that's, for me, one of the core drivers and core measures of where my nervous system is at is, do I actually feel like my days and life are spacious? And then the third would be Well, it's a little bit of a cyclical one, sort of chicken and egg, but sleep, rest, genuine rest, whether that is laying down in the afternoon for 10 minutes, just closing your eyes and taking a moment, or whether that is prioritizing 7, 8, 9 hours sleep, whatever you feel like you need. But often, the state of our nervous system will also impact the quality of our sleep. So we need to start addressing both sides of the coin. If you're not sleeping well, you're going to feel more stressed, and it perpetuates that vicious cycle. But if you're more regulated, or you are sleeping well, then it creates, again, that spaciousness, that slowness, that rest.
Apart from the quicker inhale and the longer exhale, is there a breathwork exercise you can do for us now?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I always like this as a nice little reset at any point in a podcast. So what we'll do, given where we are in the day, for anybody listening, we're 4 p.m. So I'm starting to think about, I don't want to send myself to sleep. I also don't want to stimulate myself necessarily. I just want a nice kind of balanced, calm focus. So we're going to lean into some box breathing. So box breathing, made famous by the Navy SEALs who use it on their way into a combat zone. This is going to be an equal part inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Going to breathe all through the nose. We're going to do a 4-second inhale, a 4-second hold, a 4-second exhale, and a 4-second hold. So we're going to do 2 rounds. That's nice and simple. So I'm going to count us all through it. So just following me, just bring a little bit of awareness to the breath. And then on your next breath, following me, we'll breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. And just allowing the breath to come back to center, back to its natural rhythm. Just take a moment before you open your eyes, if your eyes are closed, just to notice how you feel. And then if you have your eyes closed, you can just gently blink them open and come back into the room.
Brilliant. Thanks. Definitely needed that.
Yeah.
Just felt like...
Nice way to break it up.
Yeah. I had Olivia Lessler on the podcast recently, and she said, we're talking a lot about stresses in life. And she was saying, even in this podcast room right now, you have these bright lights that are shining on you. There are so many different stresses that are coming in. But coming back to self is so important. And you mentioned before, self, meaning, what was the third one?
So I always say self, peace or balance, and meaning. So yeah, I normally work through them it doesn't have to be in this order, but they kind of get gradually bigger as pieces of the puzzle. So connection to self, connection to balance through the lens of the nervous system and dysregulation, and then connection to meaning and purpose. Yeah.
I think people understand balance. They're like, okay, I feel balance in my body. However dysregulated someone is, they can probably sense if they're feeling more balanced or not. And then I think meaning and purpose, that's something that people understand. Oh, yeah, I've got a kid or whatever. I've had purpose in some part of my life. But I think self, sometimes people find it quite difficult to understand, like, oh, I'm really feeling like myself, or what does that even mean? Am I right in my assessment when you've had people come and work with you?
Yeah, I'd say meaning and purpose often feel quite lofty and almost ethereal to people. They go, I think I know what that would feel like. I go, what matters to you? What makes you tick? And most people can list a few things, even if they're not quite sure to begin with. Yeah, connection to self feels very broad and very grand, but also very, very narrow, because for most of us, we go, oh, there's only one me. So what is that? And this ties into the nervous system. It also ties into meaning and purpose. It's very much an interconnected web of things. But for me, connection to self is twofold. Connection to the body. Am I able to feel outside of the grey matter of upstairs in the world of thought? Can I actually feel the sensations of what it is to be here in this moment? Breath, again, is a powerful tool for this, but also just who is watching and observing the experience. I have a thought, but that's not me. We know that thoughts are temporary. We know that thoughts are transient, but there's something, the being behind the doing, the being behind the thinking. And how do we connect to that? How do we really get to understand that? And, we might use the word meditation. For me, I'm a meditator, but I think probably the this simpler, more accessible way into connecting to that self with a capital S is stillness. When was the last time you were really still and able to listen to whatever might be there and observe whatever might be there without attaching onto it? For me, the power, and I think this is important as well, it's like, why would you want to connect yourself? It allows you to acknowledge and understand whether the choices that you're making, the things that you're doing, the life that you're living, is what you really want. And I mentioned in my own life, it was autopilot. It was the shoulds. It was conditioning. It was outside in. And I was going, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that's what I want. I wasn't asking too many questions. It was just unfolding and happening. And then you get to this point that often people will speak to you where you go, how did I end up here? Clearly this isn't working. I've ended up here. So now what? And that, I think, is, I work with a lot of people who in roundabout terms might suggest that they feel lost. That feels like quite a big deal, to feel lost in your own existence. And often that is because we've either followed a path that was laid out for us, which is never our path if it's been walked before, or we're really disconnected from self. We're going, I've not listened to my gut. I've not listened to myself. I've not been making choices that are really for me. And I think this is also where it ties to the nervous system, which is sitting still can feel incredibly confronting if you've not used to it. And if you are stressed and dysregulated, which is why we often avoid it, which is how we end up further away from ourselves. And to truly listen to your intuition, we also have to be in quite a balanced, regulated space. Like I was alluding to earlier, it's, if you want to make better choices for yourself, you first have to get a handle on yourself. You have to go, I can't just keep doing and doing and doing and avoiding the silence and the stillness and the intuition and this gut and everything that I'm feeling. I can't keep just in this perpetual motion in quite a frantic way. I have to slow things down, sit in the discomfort that will be there inevitably a lot of the time, and then go, is that anxiety or intuition? Is that conditioning or intuition? Is that really my inner voice? And that's where, people talk about, and a lot of people, I don't know.
Yeah.
You always know. I truly believe that. If someone asks you a question, there might be an instinctive, impulsive answer that's coming from a place of fear or wherever it might be coming from. But there's a deeper, quiet knowing in there. And I often see that show up when I make a bit of a snap decision that I later come to regret. I'm like, okay, I wasn't that tuned into me at that point. I was acting on impulse. I was acting on anxiety or fear or whatever it might be. And so that's stillness.
That's so interesting that you go. I'm currently in this phase of life where I can really hear my gut, but maybe I know I need to act, and maybe I'm still delayed in acting. And maybe it's some people pleaser or whatever, or that fear of, confrontation, that I will get to that decision. I will make sure that it happens. But there's still a bit of that, let's say it's still a transition that I'm finding quite difficult. And I think it's important to say this is a lifelong journey and pursuit. It's amazing how enlightened I might feel after going away and being on a retreat or whatever. And then I come back, and then 3-4 days of being back in Western civilization in the middle of London, you're like, I need to really look after myself and do the self-care and all that every single day or most days.
Yeah. It's interesting. I often talk about how, modern life, the odds are stacked against us. As you spoke to this earlier, it is hard to stay regulated in ultimately what is quite a dysregulating environment. And I think that's hard in of itself, because we like to think that we should just be able to get by just doing what we want to do. But then we come up against these challenges, and the more dysregulating the environment becomes, the more we have to go, I need to take care of myself and put these guardrails in place, put the scaffolding in place to actually give yourself the best chance and the best shot of feeling clear, feeling connected to yourself, and able to make those choices. So I think it is a really tricky one, and one that we have to keep tuning back into, because I think we've both experienced, that going away and coming back from a retreat or from an experience where you're like, this time, smooth sailing this time, I've cracked the code. And in a month's time you're going, it's very familiar challenges that I'm facing. They might be an upward spiral or a slightly different form of familiar challenges, but they are still there, unless we are, making radical choices to live our lives completely differently, which is often a very confronting thing. And so I do think there's this aspect in the wellness world today of subtle escapism, where we leave and we think that the leaving and how we feel after leaving is going to remain when we come back. And the integration piece of maybe it is making different choices to where you live, where you work. And, you hear these big transformations of people completely, pulling a U-turn on their life. For most people, it tends to be a little bit more subtle. It might be how I take care of myself, how I speak to myself, the practices that I have. And for me, those things are where the real magic lies, is in sort of the daily micro level changes that you make, where cutting everyone out of your life and labeling them toxic, you're not fleeing the country and moving to the jungle. For some people, that might be what works, but actually, can you exist within your life as it is and feel better within that? And I think that's something that doesn't sound particularly sexy, because people want big change and they want immediate change. But I think it's really, really key when it comes to how we start to think about, quote unquote, healing and the healing journey.
It's funny you say that, because when you're in Bali and I find this quite a spiritually bypassing place, and people are just, in their beautiful retreats and looking at the sunsets every day, and it feels somewhat escapist. I had Robbie Bent on the podcast. I think you know him from Othership. And Robbie was saying how he wants to, the reason he chose Manhattan, the middle of New York, the busiest city in the world, was because he wants to go to the grimiest places, the places where people are suffering with most stress, where they're going the fastest, and sort out issues there, rather than going to Bali or somewhere like that.
I remember the first time I went to Bali, I went for a month and I came back. I had a great time, and I came back and a lot of my friends went, "Oh, I'm really surprised you came back. Like, I would have thought that it's perfect for you, perfect for what you do." I didn't feel that at all. It's a lovely place to spend some time, and there's a lot of good aspects to it. But, I say somewhat jokingly, but I met 4 breathwork practitioners at breakfast this morning. In terms of practitioners per square foot, it's a pretty saturated place.
Yeah.
Now, from a strategic and kind of commercial standpoint, there's challenges to that, but also I didn't meet that many people out there who I can really help you, because actually how they're living their life, they're doing a lot of the things that actually I would suggest to somebody to do. And so I've often felt that as well, which is that, I want to support people that are in a place that I've been before, both geographically, but also emotionally and intellectually and in their suffering. And there really is a lot of scope to do good here and make impact here. And there's a lot of people to help. There's a lot of people to support. And to the point that I was making just before, I'd like to believe that there is a way of existing here. Take London where we are now, in London, that doesn't require you to leave just to feel better. Can we actually create an environment, whether it's through the practices we have, whether it's through the communities that we create, where people actually can live the life that they want to live without having to run away? Because I think that for me is what feels like the big challenge right now. And it's something I'll hold my hands up to feeling a lot myself, which is I do question how feasible it is to live a genuinely in what my view of a healthy lifestyle is on the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual level, for me, in a city like London. There are a lot of good things about London. It's a wonderful city, but from a health standpoint, it's not conducive to health. And I understand why people leave. I understand why there's a part of me that wants to leave. But I'd like to believe, and maybe there's some naivety or some dreamer in there, but I'd like to believe that there's a version of life here that can work for people and work for human beings.
Do you mainly work with women? Do you have
It's a real mixed bag. Mixed bag. I'd say it's leveled out over the years. I would say at the beginning it was very heavily female focused. I think it was 2022. I had 110 people come through my retreats and I had 10 men. I'd say, last year it was probably closer to 60-40. And so there is a balancing going on. I still think we have some challenges or some work to do around getting more men into spaces like the spaces that I create. I've done some specific men's work and continue to do some specific men's work. But I'm also a huge advocate of not putting a label on the spaces that I create, because I think we should all be able to exist and do the work together. And I think more than anything, we need to be doing the work together. Otherwise it becomes more siloed and more divisive in lots of ways. I'd say still weighted towards women, but yeah, much more balanced than it used to be.
The reason why I bring it up is like the idea of being a man in 2025, especially in the UK, I think is evolving very quickly. And recently, I think it was Jamie Lang who was crying on air after doing a marathon, and everyone was like, he's, you know, a great example of masculinity. And it's, for me, that's amazing, but it's like, wow, we are still so far behind that we're acknowledging that as some feat. I feel when I look at the, let's say, the wellness spiritual space, do I think we have a lot of great examples of masculinity? I'm not sure. I see some slightly toxic traits or like bypassing traits. When I look at you, I see a guy who really like represents what it means to be a man, like masculinity. It's like you're so in touch with what you're doing, with your purpose, with your higher self, but you've got that kind of protector, provider kind of mindset as well. Is there a playbook that you're trying to build? Because I feel the UK, when I think of like the idea of like strong men, I don't feel like we have it right now. I think we need more men step up.
Firstly, yeah, thank you for that reflection. It means a lot. It's not always been something that I have felt in myself. I've often had to have it reflected back to me by other people, and probably even when it has been reflected back to me in that way before, I've kind of gone, yeah, you don't know the real me. There's that little voice of self-doubt in there somewhere. But I do feel it in the sense of the man that I am, not trying to be, but the man that I am intentionally looking to hold myself to the standard of.
Yeah.
And I think intentionality and nervous system state and embodiment and genuine vulnerability through the lens of emotional discipline. You know, I can be vulnerable, but I'm not spilling my guts to every stranger that I meet. I think that for me is an important part, and something that I haven't always had the capacity for. I think I went from highly repressed to just an open book and just divulging everything to now a slightly more centered place. So
let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think
that's a really interesting transition, because I went through a similar thing.
Yeah.
It's like you hold things in and then all of a sudden you're on a first date and it's like, I don't know. For me, I didn't even know. I wasn't aware enough to know what was acceptable or not. And then the text came later that night. Yeah, nice to meet you, but no thank you. But then all of a sudden it just comes like naturally. And I think for me, it was just a journey of coming back to self, where I'm like, you know what, like, this is an appropriate time to tell this person that I went through this, and maybe on the first day it's just about being casual. But I was just so disconnected, like the nervous system, whatever it was. So
I think it's a beautiful topic, because I think a lot of people, you know, regardless of male, female, man, woman, we're all pretty confused. I think we've gone through this, you know, huge, you know, wave of mental health conversation, of spiritual conversation, of personal development conversation, where it's like, don't be like that kind of man, but also don't be like that kind of man. And women want this, and you know, there's so much noise that I meet a lot of people and speak with a lot of people who are like, I don't know what the hell to think anymore. And as a man, you know, the journey that I went through, and what it sounds like you experienced as well, was, okay, I know that repression doesn't work. I can acknowledge that, I can intellectualize that. And so what's the opposite of that? It's openness. Okay, let's do the openness thing. I'm going to learn to speak about my feelings, because I'm being told, hey guys, you need to get better at talking about your feelings. And I go, cool, well, I just want to be accepted at some deep levels, so I'm just going to start talking about my feelings. And the second layer to that, I guess, is getting very good at intellectualizing my feelings, perhaps without getting very good at feeling them. You know, I'm a master at articulating what I'm feeling, and sometimes still to this day, not the best at actually just sitting in them going, God, that fucking hurts, but that's all it needs to do. So I think it's this pendulum swing that we see in every aspect of our own personal journey, which is, if this isn't working, we go to the other end. And then the genuine journey of sort of 2.0 is coming back to center. And so that for me is something that I believe as well, tied to this, as you mentioned, we just don't have the proper modeling of. If we think about our dad's generations, I'm going to imagine they're of a similar era. They were the repression team. That was what they were fed. That was what their conditioning. So that was passed down to us. And now we're getting this, you know, slightly different narrative of what it is to be a man and the need for openness. But I think it's a really beautiful opportunity. And, I don't have children. I would love to someday, have children of my own. I would have, I love my children regardless of boy or girl, but I would love the opportunity to be a father to a son, because I think we have this unique opportunity to go, we know that this repression thing didn't work. I've muddled my way through to a certain extent through the openness in the extreme. Now I think to a relatively, and listeners and friends of mine, feel free to call me out on this if you don't agree, a relatively balanced place in terms of having the capacity to express, the capacity to feel, but also not just free flow. And to be able to bring those to somebody and a child and impart that way of living and model that is such a beautiful thing. And that doesn't even have to be your own offspring. That can be and I think there's something lacking in our community as well, is elders modeling the right way to be. Not that there's ever a single right way to be, but certainly positive traits that we want to instill in the future generations. And as men, as we're kind of talking about in this conversation, it's the ability to be stoic in the way that the Stoics originally intended, which is the courage and the power to feel it all, but the discipline, the regulation, and the capacity to hold yourself within it and still share it when the time is required and when it's needed. And so I think for me, there's no playbook. I'm not trying, I wouldn't say, to be anything in particular. I have intentions as what I'd like to hold myself to as the standards I want to live by. It's integrity, it's honesty, it's compassion, it's all of those wonderful things that I strive to be each and every day. The final thing I just want to say on this, I think just from what we see in the world, and particularly the social media world, is social media is it's a hotbed for ego. Look at me. And I'm guilty of it. I exist on social media. So there's always going to be a part of the ego playing a role in what you're putting out into the world, because you do want that acceptance, even if it is purpose-led and service-driven and authentic to you. And so I think, this amplification of some of the less positive parts of our own egos can come to the fore. And if you're getting validated for that, it can amplify it further. And so I always think about the most healthy, positive forms of male role models that I've experienced. They're unlikely to have a big social media following. It's the quiet, stoic, confident guy who holds himself, that you're not going to with him, but he is gentle and he is kind, and people respect him, and they've got their ego in check in a really, beautiful, balanced way. And so I think that for me is what we need more of, is actually real men in the world doing real things and leading by example rather than leading by being the loudest voice in the room.
I've been thinking about this a lot, because the nature of being an influencer right now, to have influence. Social media is the new arena, and you have to walk that journey. And it's something that I've learned about with people close to me, that we need more people that are heart-led, stepping up and taking that journey. And it can feel weird and egotistical, but I think another thing that I've observed is human beings, we're smarter than we give credit for. And I feel even on social media, we really reward, for the most part, authenticity. And I think most people can understand or get when someone is not being authentic to their voice. And so it's that's how I perceive it. And so for me, as I'm starting that journey, I always come back to, Julian, just remember, why the are you doing this? Come back to the why, come back to the mission, and coming back to the story of being 21-year-olds, coming back to that guy and saying, what does that person need? What does that person need to hear right now? Because when I feel like I'm going off kilter, I kind of lose that balance and I feel kind of weird about posting. But when I come back to why the am I doing this? I'm like, hell yeah, let's get this shit out there and let's make a difference to that person. Because I personally really needed someone there when I was 21 and I didn't have that person.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I can't remember, unfortunately. I'm sorry to them for whoever it is. There's a beautiful article written a few years ago now called The Perils of Audience Capture. And it was looking at certain YouTubers, and there was a food YouTuber, and the perils of audience capture, as the title suggests, was if you go down the path of seeing what works with an audience, doubling down for virality and growth, and social media becomes the forefront. This food influencer, started doing food challenges, became obese, became severely unwell, kept going because all they wanted to do was capture more audience. That is the slippery slope of social media, because we are, as we've talked about a few times, still wired for acceptance. Social media is a form of acceptance. If you're being validated for something, there's going to be a part of you that goes, I should do more of that, because that hits something deep in here that goes, okay, I've been accepted for that. And that's where the balance of our need for acceptance and our need for authenticity come into friction. And I think the best creators, the best influencers or people of influence are the ones who are able to be strategic in how they create, because there is an algorithm, there is a game to an extent to be played. We're always playing games, but to do so still from a place of authenticity. And that's where I don't always get it right. There'll be times where I'm like, oh, that didn't quite feel like me, or that was very me, but it just fell flat because I was just ranting about something. And so it's being somewhat strategic. In an authentic way, I think is the balance to strike, which is this, again, connection to self at the core of it? Is this truly me? And can I do it in a way that does resonate with people? And I think that's the art. I think that's what the best people get right is, I don't know if you come across a guy called Jamie Clements, based in Dallas. I spent a bit of time with him out there last year. He's got close to 2 million followers on Instagram and creates beautiful, to camera videos talking about healing and talking about personal development. Every one of his videos hits because it's real, because it's true to him, because it's relatable, because it's beautifully made, but it's done in a way that, it's a formula that he knows works for him as well, and that he knows lands. And ultimately, social media, we're all looking to be seen. When something resonates at its very core with you, it's because you feel seen by it. And if you feel seen by it, that scratches your own internal itch of wanting to be accepted. And so it creates this really interesting, again, something we spoke to earlier, like it's not going anywhere. So we may as well learn how to use it in a way that is fulfilling and gives something to us, rather than it just, mining our attention and our focus and taking it from us. And can you, even in the arena of social media that we know has so many negatives, if not used properly or intentionally, and reclaim your agency in how you engage with that, which it's easier said than done when the technology is literally wired to with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk a lot about technology. That's not going away. Let's look at ancient wisdom. We talked a bit about it before we started around plant medicine and what the tribes are doing, what our ancestors used to do. Have you looked at what our ancestor did in the UK? I'm a first generation immigrant, but and the reason why I bring this up is we are, I think, me especially, but I think a lot of Brits, we're so harsh on being British, as in you mentioned repression, and that's the first thing I think of. When I think of a Brit and I say, you're so British, the first word that comes up is repression. And we are trying to get back to being stoic. People around the world really respect the British because they're gentlemanly and held back, and they use their words intentionally. But I feel like we've almost got it wrong in the way.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're sort of stoic to a fault, and it's that stiff upper lip mentality that has served us in certain ways and is respectful and admirable in certain ways, but not when it's kind of in the shadow extreme. So I don't know, certainly not as much as some friends of mine, sort of the indigenous wisdom and history of Britain. And I think partly because it's been wiped clean, from us, we just don't know. And to come back to your question earlier around, the UK being, second most miserable country, on the planet, I would argue that probably has something to do with it. You only have to look at certain cultures, Central American, South American, certain Arabic cultures, where actually their roots, their indigenous roots, are very close to the surface. They're very much a part of what has informed modern life, whether that's religion, which has its own question marks around it, whether it's more tribal culture, just the connection to the land the connection to community, the connection to elders. These are all things that when you ask me that question around what does my utopia look like, they're all on the list.
Yeah.
They're things that we have fundamentally forgotten en masse globally, but actually the healthiest cultures seem to have a connection to more so than the unhealthiest cultures. You look at the US, you look at the UK, where we're seeing a lot of these modern challenges. We are the most disconnected from our indigenous roots, our ancient roots, because those cultures do have the fabric that should still be the fabric of how we live our lives and how we live and relate to each other, how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to the universe and something beyond ourselves, and how we relate to the natural world. I think that for me is really at the core of a lot of our challenges. Is we have a very short memory. It's a very myopic society where we've just lost connection to what's gone before. And that almost gives a level of immaturity to the culture, because we go, it's just us. We're young kids with no parents. We go, we can fight on our own and we can do this on our own. It's like we're proving very well en masse that we can't.
Yeah, and you see it more in Scotland and in Ireland. And my parents are Lebanese, and when you go back to Lebanon, the pride of being Lebanese through the food, the nature, the community, the dancing, the music, it's just so apparent, and it really holds together this community around the world, the diaspora. The reason I bring this up is I really want to stop this kind of misery slope that we find ourselves in with, as you mentioned before, entrepreneurs moving to Dubai and the US. And I believe there's going to be a return. I think it's going to happen soon. But really reframing what it means to be British, I think there's a bit of a crisis, this identity crisis that you see. I think it needs to happen now, especially when you look at where the politics is going. But what can unite us apart from the pub and shit tons of alcohol?
It's a really good question, because if I'm really honest, I struggle at the moment to be in any way patriotic, as I think a lot of people do. You look around and go, what is there to celebrate? We're divided, we are polarized, there's a lot of, infighting. We're being very aggressive towards each other, and whether that's cross-cultural or whether that's even, cross-class. There's so much division, whether you look up, down, or sideways. You only have to see that. I always think about, lads' holidays of my early 20s. You're in Spain or you're in Portugal and you're on the strip and you go into a bar and there's another group of young British lads. It's not how amazing we're all here and we're all from the UK. It's probably going to have a scrap, aren't we? There's probably going to be some friction. That to me is mad. To your point of this sort of Lebanese culture that crosses borders, it's, oh my God, how amazing that we're here in the same place. Yeah. And so that's where I really struggle with UK culture, is that we've been conditioned to not really like one another. And there are bigger questions around where that's all coming from, and whether it's control from top down to really get us we're preoccupied by being pissed off with each other that we miss everything that's going on above that might actually make a difference. And maybe that's the negativity to one side. I think the fact that I am drawing a blank speaks volumes. I think we have a history, we have a culture that it's a checkered past, but most countries have a checkered past. You only have to look around at, I guess, some of the things that have occurred through the Industrial Revolution, our history of architecture. Like, there is real beauty and magic if you go to an old English, village, or there is a lot of magic there. And we have amazing countryside. I work a lot down in Cornwall at a retreat centre down there called Kabila, who have one of the last remaining temperate rainforests in the UK and in Europe, actually. And they're doing this incredible restoration project with a charitable arm called the 1,000 Year Trust. And spending time there, that's where you start to remember. You're in this ancient woodland and you go, I can feel something. And I take people there who have no real connection to spirituality, and they feel it too. They go, this is different. You're not just in Epping Forest, which is a beautiful place, but you're in this ancient indigenous rainforest, and something, particularly if you're from the land and of the land, feels profound. And so I think things like that, actually connecting us to what we do have, rather than this focus, as I did in my kind of little vents just before, on what we don't have. I think that's the shift, is actually, can we acknowledge what is still here, whilst also, not bypassing what is missing. And so I think that's where we need to start coming back together, and true community. You do still feel that in some places, but it's particularly in big cities, it's virtually absent. Yeah,
it's going back to balance, meaning, and self. I feel so much of that is tied to coming back to community, and it's weird talking about it. This is definitely not the path I expected the conversation to go down, but I think it's so needed. And I get from the southwest of the UK, you get a lot of that.
Yeah.
Again, maybe because it's isolated and it was untouched by the higher powers that be. I'd love to go into your crystal ball. Beyond tomorrow, we look a lot at the future, where the world's going, where the UK is going. What does 2030 look like for you from a nervous system regulation standpoint?
For me, I believe that the distance between the two poles will continue to widen. You'll get your AI only, metaverse lifestyle plugged into Neuralink life. The people that are tech, governed by tech, living as a subject to the technology. And I think the more that grows, and we see it already in I guess, the quiet rebellion against that, you'll see the people who are striving and fighting and yearning for what we really need, which is that true human life. I think that will continue. I'd like to think that, again, a little bit like in my own journey, there's this elastic band that pulls the further away you get from what you truly need, and it all snaps back into place at some point. But that snap back takes a rupture first. Do we collectively need to hit a rock bottom in order for things to really, really change? I'm not quite sure what that looks like. But I suppose the side of that spectrum that I see myself kind of moving more towards and very much being a part of will be, again, tech-enabled. Technology is not going to disappear, but it will be a slower pace of life. It will be more natural living. It will be community-led in the very genuine sense of the word. And so I think it's not so much about picking a side. Either you'll feel the unbearable strain of continuing intensity, in continuing pace. The pace is only going exponentially in terms of the development of these things. Either you on that wave and you don't even realize what it's doing to you. A lot of people live in that way even today, and there's no judgment within that. Or, as I got to at 24, as a lot of people are starting to come to now, we go, I can't do this anymore. Like, I just can't do this anymore. And that, for me, is where we're heading, is just the language around this stuff is very charged. You can call it an awakening. You can call it, a shift in consciousness. It all becomes a little inaccessible the deeper we go into some of the more spiritual language. But I do think more and more people will be woken up to that sense of just like, this doesn't feel good. This existence isn't working. And that leads you to one outcome, which is, I've got to try something different. And that doesn't mean that everything's going to change overnight, but just once you have that Pandora's box opened, something's got to give. It's either going to be you or it's going to be the way you live your life. And so that, for me, is where we're heading. Is the strain isn't going to get less or become less, but the way people respond to that will change and shift. And so I think that's where I hope we're heading, is towards probably this increased rift that I would like to believe would bring us eventually all back together. I'm not sure, in 5 years that's a realistic possibility. I think we'll just grow further apart. And I am very intrigued to see what that looks like.
Yeah. We've had shamans and then Peter Diamandis, Christian Angermeyer on the podcast, all saying the same thing, which is the next 5 years is going to be a dark period. But from that rupture, as you talk about, there will come light in growing consciousness as well. As maybe a parting bit of advice, back to the 24-year-old.
Yeah. If
he could do, or they could do, our listeners, do one thing today, what could they do?
Mushrooms. No. Slow down long enough to be able to listen to what it is that you truly want. We think that to get to where we believe we want to go, speed and intensity is the best route to get there. And it's the opposite. Slow down, you spend six years sharpening your axe, and then, chop down the tree in the seventh. And that, for me, is at the core of this. Is, we learn these lessons when we learn them, but slowing down so that you can really connect and listen to yourself, so that you can restore that agency and make the choices that you really want to make. I think, for me, that is at the core of how I live my life now, and everything that's led me to this point is not always getting it right, but always coming back to, is this for me? Is this what is most loving for me right now? And making choices from that place for myself and for everybody around me.
Yeah, loving to me. Loving kindness. Geez, that's been such a change in myself, I found that, God, I used to be so harsh on myself, and coming back to that every day, needing to come back to that. It's so easy to lose that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't already?
Nothing that wouldn't take us another hour. So yeah, I'm happy to leave it there.
We'll leave that for round 2.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jamie, pleasure.
Thank you so much.
If you want to know what tomorrow has in store like I do, you definitely want to listen to our recent episode where I talked to Peter Diamandis about a future where we could live forever. Thank you so much.